everybody, welcome back to Heart Breathings. Today I am going to talk to you about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart and something that I'm hoping I can help somebody out there through because it's something we face as writers pretty universally, which is self-doubt. So today I'm going to tell you some tips on how to overcome self-doubt as a writer. Stay tuned. So first of all, let me just say this, that of course, I'm telling you already that this is something I have faced a lot in my own career, but it's something that everybody faces. It's not something that it's like you're the only person who is facing this kind of doubt because you truly suck and everybody else doesn't. We all go through this, and I found that it gets amplified during certain times of my career or certain times of a book. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what times it tends to come up for me. So maybe this is going to ring true for you too if you're currently going through a lot of self-doubt, and it'll help you to see that it is normal, especially at certain stages in the writing process. And then I'm going to give you some of my top tips and things that I've seen work for me and my writing friends in overcoming that self-doubt. But I also pulled up a quick little quote on my Kindle from The Bazaar of Bad Dreams, which is Stephen King's most recent short story collection. In the front of every story, he's given a little bit of his writing process, which if you haven't picked up this book and you really enjoy Stephen King, you might like these short stories because he does give a little bit of insight, which is kind of cool. But here's one of the things he says when he's talking about limitations and how he feels fear when he starts to write short stories. So remember, I was just saying that there are certain times within your process or certain books that you're writing or certain times of, your career and milestones that you're about to hit when you feel this doubt. Well, Stephen King, one of the best-selling authors of our time, is also feeling the same thing. He says in this book, "I never feel the limitations of my talent so keenly as I do when writing short fiction. I have struggled with feelings of inadequacy, a soul-deep fear that I will be unable to bridge the gap between a great idea and the realization of that idea's potential." And he does kind of go on to talk about that a little bit in more detail. But that resonated so much with me because so much of my self-doubt stems from this exact thing. And it made me feel good. This multi-millionaire, amazingly successful, #1 New York Times bestseller author feels the same way. That a lot of my self-doubt comes from the fact that I know I have these really good ideas and I have this really strong desire to be a great writer, but I also have this great fear that I am not going to live up to that potential, that I'm never going to be as good of a writer as I wanted to. And it's always scary when I'm in the process of writing a story and I feel like it's not coming together the way that I wanted it to. And that can trigger so much self-doubt because we do have these visions for our stories. We get these ideas and we can kind of see it playing like a movie through our head. And then when we try to get those scenes down on the page, sometimes they just don't come out the way we wanted them to. And that can be really triggering when it comes to self-doubt because it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I was, having this great idea, but I can't realize its potential. But here you have proof that even Stephen King feels this way, and it's not something that you're ever going to be immune to as a writer. And in fact, I've heard other people say that if you're not doubting your writing at some point in the process, maybe you're not even that great a writer because it's more common for really, truly great writers to feel self-doubt. So if you're not feeling self-doubt and you think everything you write is perfect and amazing, that's when maybe you should be a little bit worried that, hey, maybe you're not digging deep enough and maybe you're not trying. Because I think a lot of our self-doubt comes from the fact that we want to be our best and we don't feel like we're living up to that. And we're scared of what other people will think, or that we're not, that we're coming short of what we truly felt that we could produce. And so that's where the doubt is coming from a lot of the time. And that's a good sign because it means that you care about your work. It means that you care about your readers. It means that you want to put your best work out there and you want to do your best. And because you have that desire, the doubt is just going to go hand in hand with that. But trust that because you're feeling those doubts, it means that you're on the right track toward creating your best work. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about when in the process I find that I often feel self-doubt, and I know a lot of other writers feel this way too. One is when I'm trying to decide which story to write. So I have a lot of different ideas and I just can't decide which one. I start to feel doubt that like maybe these ideas aren't good enough. Maybe I'm not like getting a big enough hook, or it's not going to be something that's going to sell, or it's not going to be something different. Maybe it's too similar to what other people are doing. So in the formulation of the idea, that's one of the places when self-doubt becomes very evident. Another time is when I'm smack in the middle of the manuscript. Like the beginning, the first act for me often flows pretty easily, and I feel like I'm getting to know these characters, or like this story is flowing pretty well. I've got this idea, because for me at least, I feel pretty solid usually about the first act at the beginning. But then when I hit the middle part and things start to get tougher, and I'm in that part where I'm like tests and checks and balances, and I'm really getting into the meat, and the story needs to be coming together plot wise and solidifying, I really start to doubt myself. And then another time besides the middle is actually when I start edits. So it's like once the rough draft is done, I usually feel really good. And then I start edits and I'm like, oh my gosh, this first part of the book is not as good as I thought. And that starts to trigger a lot of doubt, is when I'm in the middle of the edits and the story just doesn't seem to be coming together. So that's another big place for me. And then another really huge one is when I send it off for someone else to read for the first time, or when I hit publish and I know my fans are about to pick it up and other people are about to read it and judge it and review it. That's when it majorly will trigger for me of like, oh my gosh, this isn't good enough. Maybe I should have spent more time, and all those doubts start to roll in. So if you face any kind of like extra heightened self-doubt during those kinds of periods, know that it's normal. When you first send things out for other people to read, it's totally normal reaction to be nervous and to be doubting what you've written. It's also same like when you're in the middle and the story starts to get hard, or it feels muddy and it's not coming together, especially when you're first writing that rough draft, or when you're editing and you feel like it's not coming together. Just to tell a quick little story time from Sarah. I was probably about 15 books into my career, and I very vividly remember in tears coming into the bedroom where my husband was reading a book and just falling onto the bed and saying, I can't do this. This is literally, and he stopped me and he goes, wait a minute. This is the worst book you've ever written. And I was like, oh my gosh, did he read it? Does he know? Does he know my secret? What is happening? And I said, yes, this is the worst book I've ever written. I don't know what is wrong. Like, I feel like I can't do it anymore. I've done it this many times, but it's just not coming together. This is the worst book. And I was just sobbing like a big mess. And he started laughing. And I was like, why are you laughing at me? And he said, you say this every single time. And I said, no, I don't. He's like, you're probably about halfway through the book, right? And I was like, yes. And he said, you say this every single one of your books. You hit this period somewhere around the middle of the book or towards the end when it's not quite coming together, where you say, this is the worst book you've ever written. You're a terrible writer, all of this stuff. And I insisted, no, I don't. I don't do that. And he's like, I promise you, you do this every single time. And he's like, and every single time it works out, right? And I was like, yes. And he basically talked to me at that point. He was like, Sarah, this is just part of your process. And as an observer, as a non-writer person who is observing you and what you're doing, I can tell you right now that this is just part of your process. And you doubt it every time and it always comes together. So all you have to do is just keep going. And that was a moment that changed my life. And so every single time now that I hit halfway through the book and I feel that way, and trust me, I feel it acutely every single time. Like, this is the first time I felt this way, and this time it really, really is true. I feel that every single time. But now I recognize, because he became kind of a mirror for me, that this is the way I feel every time, and it always works out. All I have to do is keep going. So I've kind of developed some steps to get myself through those periods of high self-doubt, and I want to share them with you. But I wanted to share that story because I wanted you to know that, we all think, but this time it's really true. Sure, everybody faces doubt, but with me, it's really true because I really do suck. We think that it's like absolutely true about ourselves because we can convince ourselves that it's not coming together. It's never going to come together. We're not great writers. We're never going to get the career that we wanted. And it's easy to feel that doubt. And it's especially heightened in us as artists at certain points in our career. But please know that it really isn't true. It's just a mind trick your creative brain plays on you as part of your process of when things get hard. you rebel against it because it is difficult to be a writer. It is difficult to put yourself out there. This is not something that everybody can do. So just tell yourself, this is normal and I'm going to be brave and I'm going to keep going, because it isn't true that you're a terrible writer, that you're never going to have your career. All of that stuff isn't true. It's lies that you're telling yourself because you're scared. And that's where the doubt comes from. So now that I've gotten through that, let's get started on the tips that I have for you for overcoming that self-doubt. Number one is to keep going. One of the worst things you can do when you battle that type of self-doubt, no matter where you are in your process, is to just stop. Like if you stop writing, if you start working on something else, this is something a lot of people do, is that you hit a period of self-doubt, you switch your project and you start working on something else. And then what happens is a couple years later, you realize you've started 10 different books and you've never in your life finished anything. So don't follow that temptation of like, this story isn't working, it's really terrible, and doubt. Oh my gosh, look at this other story. That one's going to be better. 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a point in the process when you start that next book and it also gets hard and the self-doubt starts kicking in, and then you want to start something new. So you're going to be on this constant like hamster wheel of never finishing a book. I will caveat that by saying I just recently have done something similar for myself where I've switched projects, but I'm far enough with over 25 plus books written that I understand when something is really truly not coming together and I just needed a break. And this is more like pregnancy brain stuff. So do as I say, not as I do. But 9 times out of 10, it is going to be better to stick with the story that you're writing and actually see it through than it is to abandon it and start writing something new. Also, if you hit a hard spot and then you say, you know what, I'm going to take a break from this manuscript for the next couple of weeks and just let it float and sit for a little while. Sometimes that can be the worst thing, because I find that the self-doubt is particularly acute or like heightened when you're just close to a breakthrough in the plot or in your process or whatever. So to me, the best thing you can do is just face that fear and doubt in the eye, look it in the eye and say, I'm going to keep going and just keep working through it. And you can tell yourself the whole time, yes, this sucks. I know this is terrible. This book isn't coming together, but I'm going to keep writing and I'm going to write my way into a solution, because I feel like the more time you take off from it, often the worse it can get in terms of you let yourself spiral into that self-doubt. This is partially going to depend on your personality and what you need and what your process is, but experiment with it. If you're somebody who's constantly running against self-doubt and then quitting and never finishing a story, try pushing through, going through, continuing on with the story. Even if it really is the worst book ever written, just keep going. Because like they say, I know it's cliche at this point, but you can always edit a blank page. You're just in the rough draft stage. You're just learning the story for yourself. Keep going. Try to keep yourself from moving on to a different story because you think it's going to be easier, or abandoning this story altogether, because you're going to hit that point in every story where it feels difficult and you're going to want to quit because you're sure that it's not good, the hook isn't good, the characters aren't good, the dialogue's not good, the plot isn't coming together, or whatever it is. But you're never going to hit the end unless you can learn to overcome that hump. There's I don't know if it's like a famous saying, but I always know it from an Alanis Morissette song where she says the only way out is through. And I believe it's Winston Churchill who says, if you're going through hell, keep going. So that's my first tip for you, is if you're going through that hell of self-doubt right now, keep going. Just push through and tell yourself, I am committed to finishing this story. Even if it does turn out to be the worst book ever written, I'm going to finish it, and then I'm going to figure out what to do with it after that. But I'm not going to give up just because I started doubting myself. Another way I often tell myself about this is to just trust my process. Now, if you've never finished a book for the first time, then you don't really know your process yet, but once you've made it through a few books, you'll start to see that you do have these patterns of like feeling self-doubt at certain parts of the story, but you just need to learn to trust the process, and that if you keep going, it is going to work out, because it always does. But if you've never finished that first book, then this is the time that you have to prove to yourself that you can do it. And you're not going to do that by starting new story after new story or abandoning or quitting what you're writing. The only way to finish the story is to keep going, to keep pushing through, and to try to maybe use some of these other tips that I have for you today to keep working on your story. So tip number 2 is to keep learning. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I'm a big proponent of, even if you're a multi-best-selling author, you've sold hundreds of thousands of books, you've written 30, 40, 50 books in your career, it's important to always keep learning. And I really feel like one of the reasons that we face self-doubt and we face fear is the same thing that Stephen King was talking about in that book, is that we feel this soul deep fear that we're going to be inadequate, that we're not going to be able to tell the story that we want. And you would think that after writing 10 or 15 books that you would, oh, I've got my process down and now it's easy. But the truth is, in a lot of ways, it gets harder. And the reason it gets harder is because you grow as a writer. And so you're no longer willing to put up with some of the poor writing that you did earlier on in your career because you just didn't know better. So as you grow and as you learn, sometimes it can feel harder to pull those really great stories out of yourself. But that's why you need to keep learning. Keep giving yourself those tools, like learning more. If you feel like dialogue is a weakness for you, then spend some time studying and reading about how to write better dialogue. Take courses, find better books. If you feel like editing is where you come into trouble, there are lots of great books on editing. And I'll actually be having an entire series in the month of May on how to edit your novel. And I'll be giving you some good resources for that too. But just always be seeking more, always be looking to learn more, because that can give you more tools for how to face your fears of never really living up to being the writer that you want to be. And to be honest, there's never going to be a point where you go, okay, now I've learned everything and I'm a perfect writer and I don't have anything to worry about and my writing is wonderful. And you'll never have doubts, because all writers have doubts. Even Stephen King, even, James Patterson, even probably Nora Roberts and J.K. Rowling, everybody who is a famous author or a working author has some kind of doubts. So you're never going to hit this point where you've learned so much that you don't doubt yourself anymore. But everything you learn is going to make you a better writer, so that when you kind of come around this haze, come through the haze of self-doubt, and you start to actually see your work for what it is, you're going to see those improvements, and that's going to help you overcome those self-doubts because you can see how much you're improving. Number 3 is to give yourself permission to totally suck. Now, I know that this one sounds a little bit counterproductive, but sometimes we get stuck in the writing because we're so afraid that it's not coming out the way we wanted, or that nobody else is going to like it, or this story isn't unique, or these characters aren't coming together. And so we just feel paralyzed by that fear and we can't move on. So one of the best things that you can do for yourself when you're facing that kind of debilitating self-doubt, especially when you're writing your rough draft, is to just give yourself permission for it to be terrible. I mean, obviously you want to polish it and make it great for when you actually publish it. But when you're in the middle of the rough draft, or you're still actively working on this story, then all you have to do is just get something down on the page. Just write anything. You can fix it later, but you're never going to find your way through the story if you don't keep writing. I know that for me, at least during part of my own process, I do a lot of plotting. You guys know me by now. I do a lot of plotting and I like to have my scenes laid out, but there always comes a part in my process where it's like, the only way I'm going to learn what this story is about is to keep writing. And I end up writing words that I end up deleting because they don't fit in the story and they're terrible. But that is part of the process. That's part of the journey to figuring out what the story really is. And somewhere along the way, as I'm writing, something will click and I'll say, oh my gosh, that's what needs to happen with these characters. But I would never get to that point if I didn't just allow myself to write crappy words for a little while, because it just sort of pushes me through the story and gets those ideas flowing a little bit. So if you have to, make yourself a big sign that says, it's okay if this is terrible, or I have permission to suck, and just sit down and write anything. This is another place where sprints can come in handy for you, that you just say, okay, I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes, and I don't care if these words are good. I don't care if they end up in the main manuscript or the final manuscript or not. I just have to write something, because it's better than being stuck and just staring at a blank page and just thinking, I can't do this. And the more you allow yourself to sort of spiral into those feelings of self-doubt where you're like, I can't do this isn't coming together, the more you're going to begin to panic, and then the more you're going to want to abandon the story, or take a break, or whatever. One of the best things you can do for yourself is say, okay, I got it. It's going to completely suck. This chapter is going to be the worst thing. It's not even going to end up in the book. If anybody else read it, they would think that I could never be a good writer. But that's okay. I'm going to give myself full permission for this to be the suckiest chapter of all time. And I'm just going to keep writing. And sometimes that permission takes the weight off and it takes the fear off and it just releases us to get writing again. And even if it ends up being that for 2 whole weeks you write nothing good, at least you're writing. You have to trust that you're going to hit a point somewhere in the midst of that really terrible writing where something good is going to click. And you just have to have trust in that process. And don't give yourself over to self-doubt to where you completely quit, because that's one of the worst things you can do. Number 4 is to try reading back through some of your favorite scenes. This is a good one for me, and it often helps because when I'm in the middle of that self-doubt of like, oh my gosh, I can't send this out to my critique group, this isn't good enough, or like my beta readers or whatever, and I'm scared to let someone else read it, I will try to think back to what was one scene that when I was writing, I was like moved to chill bumps, or like I knew I nailed it during this one description or this one conversation between these two characters. It really flowed well, or like it even made me cry because it touched my heart. And I'll pull up that scene on my computer and I will read back through it. And often just that process of finding those scenes, it just opens up something where I go, okay, this is really not as bad as I thought it was, because I can sometimes convince myself in my head that my writing is terrible and it's irredeemable or whatever. But if I, like I talked about earlier, if I allow myself to just stay in that pattern of like continuing to doubt myself and continuing to be upset, it's only going to spiral into like worse and worse and worse thoughts. So anything you can do to break yourself of that, like pulling up a scene, it could be a scene from the book you're currently writing. It could be a scene from an older book or like an older short story that you really loved that you feel like you did a good job on, but just pull up something. Maybe your critique group loved this scene and had a lot of good things to say about it. So pull out those old sheets where you have all their really good comments and start to find something about that you say, okay, I actually am a good writer. I can do this. I know it's not as bad as I thought. And it starts to give you that little bit of confidence. And then while you're high on that confidence, hit send and send it off to your critique partners, because usually it's not as bad as you think. We can just convince ourselves out of fear and out of, self-doubt that we are not as good as we wanted to be. So one of the things you can do is just to read back through scenes that you really loved, that you know you did a good job on, and allow yourself to feel really good about that. And that can sometimes shift your mindset. So for number 5, I'm talking about something, I've been talking about all these things that you can do, like keep going, keep learning, that sort of thing. But number 5 is a thing that you need to stop doing. And that's stop engaging in behaviors that just spiral your self-doubt. We all kind of have them, but what we don't often do is really become mindful of them and try to stop doing it. So for years and years, for example, in my own life, I was really bad about comparing myself to other authors. So I would be at the beginning of my career and I would be comparing myself to people who have these amazing careers and these movie deals. And now actually that I have a pretty good career, over 500,000 books sold, and I've got, more than 25 books that I've written, you would think that I would just be like, okay, things are going well. I don't have to doubt myself or compare myself. But that opposite is true. And sometimes what I do is I look at people who just started a year ago and they're way above me. And I think, oh my gosh, I suck and I can't do this. And I allow those insecurities to come forward because I'm like, wow, look what they've done in a year. And it's taken me, 8 or 9 years to get where I am. And that kind of behavior is just destructive. It does absolutely nothing good for you, but we all kind of do it. Now, some people don't engage in comparison issues, and for that, you should really be happy and proud of yourself, because comparison is one of those really, really toxic and dangerous things that like sort of preys on us, and it can really, really trigger self-doubt. So one of the things that you can do if you are facing things like comparison is stop following those other authors that trigger that comparison. Stop going and checking out their Apple pages and seeing how many good reviews their books have. Stop going and looking at their Facebook pages to see how much they've like sold this week or whatever, or how their new release did. Any of those types of behaviors that trigger you to compare yourself to other people are just negative and toxic. So just stop doing those behaviors. But there are other things besides comparison that can trigger negative self-doubt as well. So one of the things I'm talking about is like going back and rereading bad reviews. I have friends that will do this. They'll like practically memorize them and just spend weeks talking and defending themselves against these bad reviews. to the point where that's all they're thinking about is the bad reviews. And it's just a bad behavior because all it does is spiral your own self-doubt to focus on the negatives. Same thing with like negative critique partners who are constantly telling you bad things about your writing. It's like we do need critique partners, if you have one, to be honest and to help us get better. But there are always constructive ways to do that. I once worked with a critique partner who I would leave our critique sessions in tears because she would just have such disparaging comments, and it wouldn't just be critical or helpful. It would often be things like, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever read. And those kind of comments just aren't good for anyone. So if you have friends or family or critique partners or beta readers or just anyone in your life that doesn't believe in you as a writer and is constantly either putting your writing down or putting you down or putting your dreams down, try to cut off your time with those people. Stop working with those critique partners. Stop talking about your career dreams with family that doesn't support you. Try to focus in on those behaviors that are helping to, increase your self-doubt and back away from them. Sometimes this manifests in just staring at the blank page and allowing yourself to say, this is never going to come together, and getting caught in those types of mindset problems like I was talking about earlier, where you just stare at the blank page and you're like, this is never going to come together. And instead of picking up a sprint or going for a walk or talking through your story with somebody else, you just allow yourself to sit there and stare at the blank page and just continue doubting yourself. Those types of behaviors are what I want you to identify. What types of negative behaviors actually increase your self-doubt? It could be going into Facebook groups where other authors are just constantly talking about their achievements, and it always makes you feel like you're not doing a good job. It could be talking to friends who are always bragging or who don't support your dreams as a writer. Whatever those things are, learn to identify them and say, gosh, I really don't feel good when I'm hanging out with this person, or this person just amplifies my doubts, or looking at these Amazon lists or, bestseller lists just makes me feel worse. Then just stop doing those things. You don't have to do them. You don't have to spend time with people who don't support you. So identify those behaviors and then stop engaging in them to whatever point you can. And then my final tip is kind of the opposite of that once you've identified those behaviors, also learn to identify things and tools that are going to help you feel better. So what I mean by that is experiment with different types of tools like journaling. So instead of journaling about all your self-doubts, what about journaling about everything you've accomplished and all the things that get you excited about why you started this story in the first place? Maybe experiment with when you get stuck in self-doubt and you can't get through a next part, try going for a walk and seeing if that helps you and get some of your creativity flowing. Try word sprints and see if that helps you. Try affirmations, like having just a simple affirmation that's taped to your computer monitor that says something along the lines of, I am a good writer. I know I can do this. It's going to come together. Trust your process. Whatever types of sayings make you feel better, that resonate with you, try putting those in places where you can see them a lot. And like I said, like reading back through stuff that you enjoyed that you wrote, or watching movies that are in your chosen genre that get you really excited, or reading other books by authors that inspire you because their writing is exactly what you aspire to be. Anything that you can think of that could get you out of that negative self-doubt spiral and back into a place of where you're feeling really good about being a writer and you're excited again about working on the story, that's the kind of things that you need to focus on. And once you identify those things, you can use them in your own life and your career to say, okay, I know I'm having this rough spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go play this game that's also a teen horror that makes me feel the same kind of feelings I feel when I'm writing my story. And hopefully it's going to give me some inspiration. So that's one of the things that you can learn to do. All right, guys, so that is basically in a nutshell, my best tips for how to overcome self-doubt. So I hope that you have found this useful. I know that it's something that can be really derailing and debilitating and overwhelming as authors, but just know that you are not alone, that no matter how successful someone is, they always still feel this. I follow a friend of mine who is a multi-New York Times best-selling author. She's sold millions of books, but every single time she pushes publish, she gets those same feelings of self-doubt, like what if this one isn't isn't good enough? What if the fans don't love it? It's just normal. It's something that we all go through, whether you're writing your first book or your 100th book. So know that you're not alone. That is totally normal. But also know that you're not powerless when it comes to conquering and overcoming your self-doubt. So hopefully some of these tips have resonated with you and you can use them to overcome your own self-doubt and to get back to the joy of writing. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. Thank you again for 16,000 subscribers. As I'm recording this, I just hit 16,000 subscribers this week, and it really means the world to me. So thank you for everyone who is subscribed. If you enjoyed this video and you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button down below and hit the notification bell so that you'll get notified whenever there's a new video up from me. Also, I'll leave a link to my blog at heartbreathings.com where I go into more detail on each of these tips. So I'd love for you to head over there and read that post as well if you would like to, and check out my site. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button so that I know you enjoyed this content and so that other people will know that this was a good video to watch for overcoming your self-doubt. Thank you for all your support, and I will see you guys in next week's video. Bye.